Hello everyone, my name is Linda. I am the only girl in a family of just men. I have 2 brothers and my father, James. I once had a mother, but she is tragically no longer with us. My 2 brothers are named Lucas and Brad, and they are my younger brothers. Brad is a typical preteen boy who does his best in middle school and reads comics. He's a rather well-tempered kid, and I've never really had issues with him. Lucas, however, is a whole different story. That's what I'll be focusing on in this. Growing up, things were always a little bit chaotic. Lucas, being the jealous boy he was, always hated me and my brother. He always accused us of being favorites, and that Dad loved us more than he did him. I don't think that was true, but he was so set in his mindset that there was no way of convincing him. He was cruel and acted out because of this, but I think it was just him being a kid and wanting attention. Due to his acting out, he would constantly break things or make mistakes that would infuriate my father. My father was very hands-on when it came to discipline. He wasn't afraid of punishment if we displeased him, and Lucas tended to do that a lot. I remember once, Lucas stole my dad's cell phone when he walked out of the room. He messed around with it for a bit before becoming bored, and then he dropped it in our fish tank. My father was furious, and Lucas tried to claim that he just wanted to see if it would float. My father had grabbed him up by the arm and took him into his room to whip him. This wasn't the only time he did something like that either. Another time, he started messing around with the back of the TV. He said he was curious how it worked, and I tried to tell him that he would get electrocuted that way. He just told me to shut up and mess around with the wires. He wound up causing an electrical fire when our TV practically exploded and nearly got himself killed by trying to throw water on it to stop it. My father managed to stop him before he did, but it didn't save him from another beating. I never understood why my brother was so adamant to get attention this way. He didn't seem to care if it was positive or negative attention he received. My mother, however, was always there to try to defend him. She would always be on his side, trying to keep my father from constantly punishing him. James never listened, though, telling her that he had to be corrected, or he would keep going down this path. I think she's what kept my brother from cranking up his bad behavior, as he loved her very much. He got that positive attention he craved so much from her. That all ended when she died, however. My mother had run out to grab a few things from the corner store. It wasn't very far, so she had walked there in the middle of the day. On her way back, she was in a terrible accident. It was a horrific tragedy, and my whole family was grieving her loss. Lucas was so angry and began to scream about how unfair the world was, how he would find the person who did it and stab him himself. He was so angry at the world, and in that moment, I couldn't exactly fault him. I was pretty bitter too, not understanding how someone good like my mother had to die. My father grew colder as well from this, and I think the whole incident drove a wedge between us all. The funeral was terribly sad, but I remember seeing Lucas just staring down at her casket. He didn't have any tears in his eyes, or any sort of emotion on his face. He just seemed blank, like he was staring off into another world. I remember feeling a little creeped out, but figured he was coping in his own way. His behavior after her death began to spiral out of control. He was showing a chaotic side of him that was probably psychotic, looking back at it now. He was probably exhibiting some antisocial or sociopathic behavior. He found a new sick pleasure in watching others' misery, in causing that misery, or just making life difficult for everyone else. It was sadistic and sick, but my father was no longer trying to curb his actions, so it just grew worse and worse. My little brother, Brad, saved up money to buy himself a nice pair of Jordan shoes. He was a basketball player, and he was working part-time at the mall to save up money. He only got to wear them a couple of times before Lucas snuck into his room and stole them. He didn't keep them to wear, though. That would have made too much sense. He instead took them to the living room and set them on fire. I woke up to the sound of our blaring smoke alarm, running out into the living room and seeing him standing over this fire. It smelled terrible. like burning rubber. I screamed at him for doing it and put it out with the small extinguisher we kept in the closet. My father had woken up from the noise as well and wound up backhanding my brother for putting everyone at risk. Brad was so heartbroken over having his shoes destroyed after working so hard to get them. I felt terrible for him, and I felt a bitterness toward my other brother. Lucas didn't even look fazed, not even from the hit he received. He looked satisfied, like he got the exact reaction he had been looking for. It unsettled me. We all shared one Xbox 360 as well in the house, and took turns using it to play games. Brad was currently playing the recent Call of Duty of the time, and Lucas strolled in and decided he wanted to play video games now. Brad informed him that it was still his time to use the console, and that Lucas would have to come back in an hour. Lucas declared that he didn't care and would take the Xbox from him by force if he had to. They began to argue back and forth about it, Brad calmly but irritably explaining he wouldn't budge, with Lucas getting louder and angrier with each moment. Lucas wound up snatching the wired controller from his hand and began strangling him with the cord. He reacted so drastically to a disagreement about a game that he had decided the best course of action would be to choke him out. My father wrestled him off Brad after a minute, and of course immediately punished him for his actions. Brad had a perfect ring around his neck that bruised a bit after that, and he explained to me how frightened he was to live in that house. I understood his fears, as I was also living in a personal hell with Lucas. I came back from school one day. I was around 17 at the time, and Lucas would have been around 15. I headed to my room to unwind. It had been a long day, and I didn't want anyone to bother me with any crazy shenanigans. As I entered my room, though, I saw Lucas sitting at my vanity. I was about to shout at him for being in my room, but I then noticed what he was doing. He had my makeup smeared everywhere, and he was eating my lipstick from the tube like it was some kind of candy. I was enraged and disgusted all at once. Makeup is not cheap. He was basically swallowing $20 a mouthful, and I shrieked at him in outrage. He laughed at me, his teeth caked with lipstick, and what I assume was probably liquid foundation. I chased him out of my room, furiously trying to swat him with my purse. Another time, while I was in my room, talking to my now fiancé on the phone, I had no idea Lucas was in my room. He apparently had snuck in before I entered and crawled underneath my bed like the little demon he was. While I was sitting on the edge of my bed, talking to my then boyfriend, he suddenly grabbed my ankle and yanked me down off the bed. I screamed in fright and then in pain as he suddenly sunk his teeth into my leg. I used my other leg to kick him in the face until he let me go, my phone lying on the ground. I demanded to know what was wrong with him and that I would break his teeth if he ever tried something like that again. I yanked him out the rest of the way from under the bed by his collar and forced him out of my room. He left a sizable mark on my leg, and my boyfriend was extremely concerned for me. I felt embarrassed that he had heard the whole thing, trying to explain to him that my brother was actually a demon. My brother despises my fiancé as well, so his hatred isn't just exclusive to us. I brought my fiancé over for dinner one time. I know, what a horrible idea. But I wanted to try and pretend we were a normal family. My brother Lucas took one look at him, and I guess decided that he needed to make him suffer too. He wound up stabbing him in the hand with a steak knife after we sat down at the table. I was in tears as I quickly ushered him out of the house, hand wrapped in a towel to help the bleeding. It wasn't too deep, thankfully, and my fiancé finally agreed with me that my brother was a living nightmare. I was just looking forward to moving in with my fiancé and escaping it all. When my father heard what he did after he got home from work, he finally threatened to boot my brother out on the street if he ever did something like that again. I felt it was a little too late for that. Things were rocky, but calm after that, all the way up until the day before my wedding. I was already a bundle of nerves, going back and forth from being excited to anxious. I knew my fiancé was the man I wanted to marry, but I think everyone gets a little nervous before making a giant commitment. I went to bed that night with confidence I had managed to talk myself up into, knowing that everything would go perfectly. Lucas, however, was on a mission to make sure that my big day would be a big disaster. He snuck into my room in the middle of the night with a pair of clippers and cut my hair. I mean, he lopped off nearly all of my hair in my sleep. My hair went from long and beautiful to choppy and right at my ears. I woke up, looked in the mirror, and nearly passed out. I was screaming and crying, devastated that he would do such a thing on the day of my wedding. I went to scream at him. It could only have been him who did it after all, but I couldn't find him. I checked his room, but it was like a tornado had gone through it. His drawers were open and emptied, his bedsheets were gone, and all the crap in his closet was strewn all across the room. It looked like he had been hastily grabbing things before taking off. So my brother decided, before he would run away, he had to make one last memorable action. I was the unlucky victim since it was my wedding day. I swore I would never, ever forgive him for wrecking my wedding day. I managed to get an emergency hair appointment to fix the damage the best they could. They wound up cutting it even shorter to a pixie style, and I was bawling all over again. At least it was all even and not a choppy mess, I guess. I hate him so much for what he did to me, for ruining my wedding, and for tormenting my entire family for all of the days he lived there.